wondered why people give a standing ovation? I'm going to tell you a little story about August 2012 in Syracuse, New York. I returned to Syracuse as an alumni 6 years after I'd graduated from undergrad. And I was a little nervous that day, nervous because the university had asked me to do a favor for them. So there I was in the Carrier Dome at the prep room, lining up with all the administration and faculty members from around the campus. I was in a processional line, and I was at the front of that line. And as we got to the bottom of the dome field, we walked past the 5-yard line, the 10-yard line, the 20-yard line, and one group of the faculty went on to their seats on the field. There we stood at the top of the stage. There were thousands of students, parents, faculty, and staff, and the university band was playing some of that university cheesy music. And that spot in the line is usually reserved for the senior faculty member at the university who is to give the keynote for the university convocation. But this year, they decided to break with university tradition and pick the first ever non-faculty member to give the university convocation keynote, me. What did a kid in his mid-20s have to say to thousands of parents, students, faculty, and staff? So we arrived on the stage, and I got more and more nervous because what I was about to do didn't quite relate to the formalness of the occasion. I was nervous because I didn't have a quote from Steve Jobs or Margaret Mead or Stephen Covey. I didn't have a power poem or PowerPoint. All I had was a lyric line from Drake. YOLO. You only live once. That was the first words out of my mouth. And as I went to task against Drake's claim that we only live once, making the claim that what we do matters, what we do counts, I nervously rushed through the speech, turned around, sat down, and I looked ahead, and the entire dome had given me a standing ovation. Have you ever wondered why people give a standing ovation? My answer is, quote Drake, you'll get a standing ovation. Well, the truth is, standing ovations aren't magical. If you ask any social scientist, they will carve down standing ovations to really 4 attributes. 3 of them you probably get. The 4th one is probably going to be a surprise. The first, the higher the quality of the show, the more likely the people are going to stand. If it's a good show, you're going to stand up. Familiarity. The higher the likelihood that people want to stand, they're going to stand. Think about when you go see your child or your niece or your godson at a play. It doesn't matter whether they sing off tune, you're going to stand anyway. The other is influence. The more you come to an event with people like you, people around you, maybe your spouse or a group of people you came with, if they stand, you're more likely to stand, and there's more likely to be a standing ovation. But this 4th one is interesting. Mathematicians call it the error, the variance, the degree, in their words, the degree of disagreement. In my words, the degree of difference. You see, the more different the audience is from each other, sophistication, education level, economic level, the greater the likelihood that the audience will stand. The more different the art form as well, the greater the likelihood that folks will stand. So it's really the difference that makes the difference. So how is this relevant, and why is this relevant for you guys? Because the standing ovation reminds us that there are macro behaviors that are derived from micro moments, that our thoughts, that our assumptions at the very core of who we are can have an impact. If you take the magnifying glass and look very carefully at some of our greatest innovators, our greatest creators, our greatest leaders, they brought different perspectives, different interpretations, different ways of seeing and solving problems to bear. The difference that built one of the most admired companies in the world will probably surprise you. Most of us think that Walt Disney built the Walt Disney Company. Most of us think it was his creative intelligence. But the more you look closer at the story, it was Walt's creative intelligence combined with Roy Disney's business acumen, that really built Walt Disney World. There's power in difference. There's power in different ways of seeing problems and different ways of solving problems. And we know the research is very clear. When you have different people around the table, creativity goes through the roof. Innovation goes through the roof. You become smarter and more accurate, and you're able to capture your market even more. The difference makes the difference. And in reality, none of us can escape from this. Think about it. The technology that we're all adding on our phones every single day is bringing us closer and closer to people we disagree with, to perspectives that we don't hold. Universities around the globe are changing their whole curriculums, offering dual and sometimes triple and sometimes quadruple degree programs to mix the education up so that students get a different education for the different world that we now find ourselves in. And oh, by the way, if you're doing well without difference, I guarantee you there's some kid somewhere in a garage coding his or her way at you with a new, different solution. We've seen this happen over and over again with incumbents and experts who are being beat by people who came up with a different way of looking at a problem and a different way of solving a problem. Like I said, it's the difference that makes the difference. But why don't we take advantage of this great power? Lots of reasons. Number one, we're allergic to difference. When our brain gets a signal of an object, a person, or an idea that is counter to our own, when the brain can't relate to that object, person, or idea, the amygdala goes off. It sends a signal to the hypothalamus sends a signal to the sympathetic nerve system, and that is responsible for all of our unconscious actions. And immediately we're right in fight or flight mode. We're blocking the very thing that's going to help us. We also sort ourselves physically. We know, based on research and the data, that people are living closer and closer to people they agree with. They're going to church with people they agree with. They're eating with people they agree with. And they hire people just like them. We're separating ourselves digitally. Every time we sign on to a social network, don't you know the algorithms are tuned to drive you right to what is just like you, not to what's different? Many of us don't embrace difference because we don't like conflict. You see, conflict comes from differences. And our organizations love agreement. So we push difference away, all to reward compliance. And instead of seeing problems and solving problems in very different ways, our meetings have turned not into vibrant discussions, but caverns of silence. And another reason we don't embrace difference is because many of us are successful without it. Revenues are up, people are productive, people are happy, and there's absolutely no way, no reason to shake the boat. But what if you're leaving a lot of value on the table? What if a different way of seeing a problem and a different way of solving a problem can actually be just the thing you need? Isn't that what innovation is all about? Removing the barriers between us and a better future? And one of those biggest barriers, one of the major barriers along the way of innovation is our allergy to difference. I confess that I don't have all the problem. I don't have all the solutions to the problems. And I realize that not much can get done in a 20-minute speech. But I do want to give you guys 3 primers for the way you ought to think, things that I've seen in my own world at work, in my own life, that have driven difference. How many of you guys watch cable news? Well, I don't like cable news either, but I turn into a junkie around the election season because I want to see what the different network newses are saying about the candidates, whether it's Fox News or CNBC or MSNBC or CNN. And have you ever wondered how these networks came to be? Well, there was a guy who noticed something. He noticed that at the time, news had only been available during certain times of the day. CBS, ABC, and NBC had their 30-minute nightly news slots, and that was it. So this guy, right here in Atlanta, said, what if we flipped it? Instead of news being available just for some time, What if we make news available all the time? And that's when Ted Turner changed the face of broadcast news and journalism forever. Today, over 70 television stations worldwide broadcast 24-hour news. Is there something in your organization that can be reversed? Is there an assumption that you can turn on its head? And the funny thing about this story is ABC, NBC, and CBS actually studied 24-hour network news at the time. You know what they concluded? That it was too expensive, and according to CBS, that would never work. Boy, were they wrong. Because not only did Ted Turner create CNN, but he opened up an entire market of network cable 24-hour news. And Ted's not the only one that does it. Henry Ford revolutionized the supply chain in factories by bringing the work to people, not by bringing people to the work. You got people like Elon Musk who decided to do something very different than his other technology counterparts. He decided to give away his intellectual property with the assumption that other people can finish his work better than he could. And what about Pokemon Go? They didn't take us inside to play a video game. They took the video game outside. Sometimes breakthrough ideas arise when we take our deeply held beliefs and turn them upside down. What assumptions in your work, in your organization, can be flipped and help you think differently? Recently, I'll tell you guys a little bit about what I do. I took a senior role at Google X on an engineering team. I've been at Google for 5 years. This was my first step into an engineering team, and that very rarely happens in the Google world. And nowadays, I spend most of my time on drones, but I've been a part of most every experimental project that Google has ever worked on since. The self-driving car project, smart contact lens that can measure glucose using the tears in your eyes so diabetics no longer have to use invasive measurements to check their glucose. Airborne wind turbines, very cool things, none of which have laws, all of which are very different. Aviation itself, when we think about drones, is one of the most highly regulated industries in the entire world. And because of that, I have to know the technology that we're working on inside and out. You see, the regulations that governments across the world are coming up with will define everything from the performance of an avionics unit to the communication and spectrum links that drones will use to talk to each other, to talk to other manned aircraft. So I spend a lot of time between my home base of Washington, D.C. and California, hanging with our engineers. And anyone who goes bi-coastal as much as me, the plane rides get tiring, but I have developed a love for these very complicated machines called airplanes. Airplanes have about 130 miles of cables and networks in each plane. Not only that, but they have around 4 million parts that make up an airplane, made from 1,500 companies in over 30 countries. And oh, by the way, that fuselage you fly on has enough power to power 500,000 30-inch screen TVs. Planes are powerful and complicated machines. And all these details are even more defined by thousands of pages of aviation regulations internationally and domestically. They're so complicated, it's the reason you don't see new models of airplanes. It takes an airplane years to get certified by a government to get in the air. Planes are complicated machines. They're complicated to operate, and they're complicated to design and build. And it's impossible to build a system of that size without combining the domains of expertise within a company. And so that's what Boeing and Airbus do. They have these things called IPTs, integrated product teams, that actually drive the innovation. They don't take the innovation over to the systems guys and let them deal with it, and then the airframe gals and let them deal with it, and then the marketing people. They bring all of them together to work on one piece of the innovation. And this type of collaboration over the past decades have led to so many decreasing and inefficiencies of that process, and has increased communication so much so that they're able to make planes faster, cheaper, and more economic friendly. You see, fast-paced and nimble companies like Boeing and Airbus, or a company like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, are leaning less and less on singular functional people and leaning more and more on a different group of functional people who are brought together under one goal. You see, combining domains isn't just good for companies, it's good for entrepreneurs. Stanford University did a study to try to figure out what their great innovators and great entrepreneurs do that others don't. So they picked 1,700 of the greatest alumni from Stanford Universities, pulled out a sample of 766 entrepreneurs, and you know what they found? They found that it wasn't the fact that they had a lot of businesses. It wasn't the fact that they were most innovative, had the most patents or trademarks, or had infiltrated new markets and new spaces. They found out that the great entrepreneurs had so much contact with diverse networks of colleagues and diverse networks of business advisors that it made them 3 times more innovative than their counterparts. In fact, the weakest link to someone different than them was stronger and more impactful than the strongest link of someone that was just like them. Whether you're a team or whether you're an individual, contact with people outside of your box can be the greatest thing to your entrepreneurship. It can help you discover new ideas and new ways of seeing problems and new ways of solving problems. There's a big assumption that experts and knowledge is always useful. We like being called experts and gurus, and some of us in here actually assign that title to ourselves, and we wear it like a badge of honor. But have you noticed the experts keep getting it wrong? Researchers have found over and over again that an expert's desire to be right has caused false recall from them. In other words, these experts recall insights that simply aren't true, and they project onto the future, the past. They fall in love with the past and they have trouble seeing anything beyond what they know. The same study found that non-experts don't have the same behavior. They come to mistakes with fresh ideas, new perspectives, and new interpretations. Entrepreneurs, when we see this everywhere, are leaping into areas they never had experience in and changing the game. There are new kids on the block in fashion, new kids on the block in tech, and new kids on the block in politics, making waves. How are you allowing non-experts to be a part of your process? You know, the risk of doing things wrong were very high for Bob McEwen. He was the CEO of a dying company called Goldcorp, one of the biggest gold mining corps in the world. And the company was in big financial trouble, and the engineers were not finding any gold from the Red Lake city in Canada. But McEwen had to do something crazy. And what he did was actually crazy. It was something that no other mining company would ever do. He released all the data about the Red Lake location where his engineers couldn't find any gold. And so 1,400 researchers, geologists, and scientists from around the world looked at this data. Mind you, none of them were in the gold mining business. And these 1,400 people found gold. 80% of the sites that they found had delivered gold. It revived Goldcorp, all because they took the data to the non-experts. When a novice comes to the table, more solutions come to bear. You know, I left out one thing about the Syracuse story. I was actually 2 weeks before the speech, I had the whole speech done, but something wasn't right. I needed some oomph to the speech, so I did what any wise person would do. I sent a message off to my fantasy football text group made up of all my friends. And usually we don't discuss speeches in the group, but I decided to do something a little crazy. So my friends are making jokes about the speech, and finally someone texts back, YOLO. I was like, what is that? You know, I'm cool, I work at Google, but I don't even listen to Drake. I didn't know what it was. So I Googled You only live once. And I said, man, that's exactly what I need. And yes, this isn't building a business. Yes, this isn't launching a product, but it's a very small reminder that sometimes our best genius can come from someone who has a different perspective. It wasn't the standing ovation that made the difference. It was the difference that made the standing ovation. And I'm not suggesting that many of you don't love difference. I know many of us like different cuisine. Many of us will help anyone the moment they come and they need help, regardless of who they are. But you see, we love difference. We love difference from a distance. But when it's about being close, distance and difference become a problem. You know, it's not that we have an inclusion problem. What we really have is an exclusion problem. It's not that we're leveraging the power of difference. It's just that we aren't leveraging in places that matter, where it can count the most, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our boardrooms, in our leadership teams, and even in our protest. What assumptions can you reverse that can change the nature of your innovation? How can your organization make more contact with people who are outside the box? And what is your organization great at that can benefit from some genius of another person from an unlikely perspective? I just came today to remind you that it's the difference that really makes the difference. God bless you guys.